Aloha and welcome to ThinkTechHawaii.com. I'm your host, Jeff James, and today's show is the military in Hawaii. Our guests today, two special guests. We have Cam Napier, the editor-in-chief of Pacific Business News, and Kathleen Galagher, a reporter with Pacific Business News. So welcome and thank you guys for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on the show.
Okay. Well, the topic today is going to be the military in Hawaii. Is it going to be an economic boom or bust?
Right.
And I picked this because I read an article that Kathleen had written recently called Mission Military, and it talked a lot about the impact of the military in Hawaii, not just people, but economic and across the board. So what got you started on that, and how did you end up with that assignment, or did you just pick it out of the blue?
Well, I was speaking to some economists about general kind of thoughts on the economy in general and whether they thought Hawaii's economy was going to grow or shrink. And the military is a huge part of that because it's the second largest industry. So some of the economists were quite alarmist in the sense that they thought it was definitely going to shrink and Hawaii needed to prepare for that. And some of the other economists were saying that hopefully it just stays where it is, but we should still be preparing for the consideration that troops might reduce their presence here.
Okay, so did you have an opportunity to talk with the military about whether they were going to grow or not?
Right.
They might know more than the economists.
I did, though to a certain extent, the members of the military didn't really know because it's a decision that comes from Washington. In the short term, there didn't seem to be any immediate plans to shrink, and there is the pivot to the Pacific. But there was some concern that because of budget cuts, there could be a reduction.
Okay. So did you have an opportunity to talk with any of the CODELs or anybody outside of the military but associated that kind of, is involved in those decisions? Maybe somebody from the Military Affairs Council or something like that?
Yeah, the Military Affairs Council, I did speak to them, and they were slightly concerned. There was no concrete evidence at this point in time, but kind of concerns about BRAC, so base realignment enclosures, and sequestration made them want to look into it a little bit more closely. So they're kind of commissioning for studies at the moment to look into the exact impact of military presence in Hawaii.
Okay, so Cam, you were around, you've been here for a while
Born and
reporting.
raised, right.
And so you were around for the last round of BRACs when
Right.
Barbers Point was BRAC. So
Right.
what is your sense? Do you feel like we're kind of in danger near for another BRAC, and is Hawaii vulnerable, or do you think we're relatively safe?
Well, the pivot to the Pacific does make one feel that Hawaii's importance is going to remain very, very high. But then you never know. Technologies evolve and strategies evolve, and the composition of forces may change over time. I certainly remember Barbers Point closing. That was the base we went to all the time when I was a kid. We go to White Plains, we go to the dispensary there, go to the exchange, the commissary, and then one day it was shut down. It was a ghost town. It was very eerie to go on base after the shutdown. But interestingly, the forces assigned there did not leave Hawaii. They were just moved over to Kaneohe.
Right.
So Kaneohe, I think, as a region, a neighborhood, got a little bit of an uptick. And what the military saved was the operational expense of Barbers Point as a facility, which I think at the time was something like $12 million a year. So even when a BRAC happens, it's possible that it doesn't change things quite as much as people may fear. But we did have a close call with the Army, right, with a substantial number of troops that they were thinking about reassigning elsewhere.
Yeah, I remember that a couple years ago. I think they were looking at the 25th Infantry Division, which would have been something like 15,000
Right.
folks getting pulled out of Hawaii. So
Right.
that would have had a huge impact,
Right.
kind of across the board. If you think about the, just on the economic side,
Right.
and there's second and third order effects to that. If you pull 15,000 people out, let's just say they have 1.5 children each. So
Right.
you got north of 20,000 kids.
Right.
So that's 20,000 less kids in the school system. So that's 20,000 less demand signals for education. So what happens to the schools? What happens to the teachers?
Right.
And I think in your article, Kamakana Kamaloa, who's with the Military Affairs Council, the quote was something like, the public doesn't have a real good idea of the impact that the military has. And I think that a lot of people understand the first order, but they don't see the second, third, and fourth orders on that.
Right.
So it's just kind of interesting. And I think, talking about BRAC and Barbers Point, if for no other reason, the community here should bond together against another BRAC, because I think Barbara's point was the textbook example of how not to do a BRAC from a city and county and
Right.
state perspective, because if you go out there,
Right.
it's like nothing's happened. It's just a
Right.
ghost town
And
with
yeah,
dilapidated
PBN's been
buildings.
reporting on that consistently. There are so many challenges for everyone who's trying to turn what we now call Kalailoa into a thriving community. There's infrastructure challenges,
Mhm.
zoning challenges. HCDA has oversight, Hawaii Community Development Authority, same group responsible for Kaka'ako, and sometimes people feel like their attention is always on Kaka'ako and the west side is not getting looked after as much. There's been some ambiguity over which local government is responsible for the roads. Really some basic questions that
Yeah.
need to be settled before anyone can go and build a neighborhood or build a shopping center or a resort. We were just reporting this week on plans to maybe put an artificial surf lagoon into Kalailoa as the basis of
I saw the article.
of a future
I'm very
resort.
familiar with that, actually.
So, some really interesting things could be going on out there, but something about the handoff seems to put it into this nether zone.
Yeah, the surf lagoon, I think I think that's an incredible idea.
Yeah.
One of the guys that's kind of the proprietors of that idea lives just up the street from me, so we've talked about it,
Yeah.
and Brian
yeah.
Kealana, who is,
Yeah.
a stalwart and part of the legacy of Hawaii.
Absolutely.
Living legacy here.
Right.
And, who better to build a surf lagoon, and what a better
Right.
place. I mean, that's the growing part of the island. It's
Right.
it's almost becoming the second Honolulu, which was envisioned way back
Right,
when,
right.
so. But back to Barbara's Point, I think the only people that have benefited from Barbara's Point closing are the copper thieves.
Yes.
Because when I was in my last capacity,
Yeah.
I mean,
All that infrastructure was
Yeah.
there, and no one was watching it,
Yep.
and there's been so much of that going on.
Yeah, lots of it. So, when you think about Barbara's Point, even though Barbara's Point closed, that part of the island grew.
Right.
When you talk about, housing, I mean, it went from, sugarcane fields to, it looks like suburbia mainland right now.
Right.
And so you've got all these folks that are, but there's no industry out there, so everybody's
Right.
got to, come into town. And I know a large portion of the folks that work, in the Navy and in the Air Force travel from the west side into town
Right.
through horrendous traffic. And so now we've got the rails being built, so that's going to offer an opportunity. But, I know you report on transportation as well, not just the military. So what are your thoughts on rail, and how does that look like it's going to pan out? I mean, that's been in the news quite a bit, and I see a real good connection between the opportunity that rail presents for the military, community, and so how do you see that going?
Yeah, rail has obviously been a very hot topic recently, and I guess the question about what next is kind of the big one at the moment. So recently, they just had a board meeting to discuss the different options, because financially the plan as it stands puts them at a massive deficit. So they're looking at what they're calling a recovery plan to see at what point they can stop and afford to continue on. But from what I understand from you, the military station would not be one of the ones cut from that, as the plans as they are. So
Yeah, I think in the current inception, the first phase is going to get done,
Right.
and it's going to finish relatively soon to Aloha Stadium. So you could use that to service folks coming to the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. But I guess what I would get to is, and the next phase will be there'll be a station at Makalapa Gate. So eventually that'll probably get done as well. But if you think about the woes that they're having financially, the military's gone through this as well. And a long time ago, we realized that partnering with private organizations sometimes is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this with housing, because that's not kind of a core function of the military.
Right.
And we got out of the housing business, and we privatized it and did a public-private partnership. And now, it's working out phenomenally well for everybody. The people that live in the housing,
Right.
the private company that's doing it is making money, and everybody's happy. It seems like there might be opportunity in that regard for rail. Maybe they should look at a public-private partnership and follow the
Right.
military's model. We've walked down this road, and we've got some significant experience. So what do you think about that, Cam?
that is one of the things that they proposed. They, I think, had 6 options, and public-private partnerships was one of them. I think their concern is that given the amount of money they need, it would be a lot of work to secure those, and the amount of time it takes to secure that would put huge delays on the project, which would then cost money. So I think that's kind of their hesitancy towards something like that, but it is something they said they were looking into.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any other
I don't know.
comments.
I mean,
Well,
you're gonna build
yeah, I mean, it seems like well, it's definitely worth exploring. The development aspect of rail has been central to its mission from the beginning, that it was supposed to spark transit-oriented development and revitalization of different neighborhoods along the path. So maybe with the right financial incentives, it can become possible for developers to help pay for the construction of rail, as long as they're able to get their financing to do that, and develop these mixed-use neighborhoods that people have been looking for. Because the two kind of need to happen on the same timeline. If there's nothing around a rail station, then you're kind of missing the Todd component. But if you build the neighborhood before the rail station is there, it's out of sync in a different way. So it's possible that the public-private partnership option could get those timelines meshed a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there.
Right.
But I'll refrain from any further. I don't want to be one of those that are bashing. I think rails presents a great opportunity. You know, if I look at it parochially just for the military, the opportunity for folks, let's just take the shipyard, for example.
Right.
You got, you know, the largest industrial employer in the state, 5,000 guys,
Right.
start work at 6:30 in the morning, finish at 3 in the afternoon. And most of them live somewhere, you know, west of Pearl Harbor. So rail presents a very viable opportunity for just that demographic
Right.
to get to and from work. But, you know, many people that come here and decide to buy a home, you know, Eva is the most affordable part of the island in
Right.
general. So there's a huge opportunity there to, you know, to get ridership if the stations are set up right, if the city does the bus routing appropriately, you know, as a way to get people kind of that last mile connection. So, you know, I'm personally very interested in rail and seeing it, you know, come to fruition. And if they're going to stop at Middle Street, you know, they need to clear out the leadership and start from scratch because they're not getting it.
Really?
That's my personal opinion. I mean,
Would you like to see it as planned, or do you think it should?
they got to go the distance and then some. They can't stop
Really?
before Alamoana, and then they got to have plans to go beyond that because there's opportunity here. You just got to have, you know, there needs to be a little tightening of the belt and a little stricter oversight, I think. And there's, you know, I hear a lot of excuses about why it's all, you know, there's 1,000 different reasons why you can't do it, but I don't see anybody really taking the whole thing and pushing it forward.
Right.
And, you know, and do it in a disciplined manner. So a little frustrating as a, you know, a taxpayer and
Right.
somebody who's
Yeah.
going to end up, you know, funding portion of that.
Right, right.
So,
You know, in terms of potential ridership for rail, I know a lot of active duty folks have rental allowances and they live off base. What percentage would you say, if you had to guess, live on base versus off base and might be potential commuters
well,
who would
Cam,
use
I'm
rail?
going to have to consult Google, but to do that, we'll have to take a break. So
All
we're going
right.
to take a short break. You're watching ThinkTechHawaii.com. I'm Jeff James, your host of Military in Hawaii, and we'll see you back here in about a minute.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham here with Think Tech Hawaii, and I invite you to watch my show, The Economy and You, each Wednesday at 3 o'clock here in Hawaii on OC 16. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Aloha! My name is Danelia, D-A-N-E-L-I-A.
And I'm the other half of the duo, John Newman. Aloha.
We are the co-hosts of Keys to Success, which is live on the Think Tech live streaming network series, weeklies on Thursdays at 11 a.m.
Aloha! My name is John Waihe'e, and I actually had a small part to do with what's happening today. Served actually in public office. But if you don't already know that, here's a chance to learn more about what's happening in our state by joining me for Talk Story with John Waihe'e every other Monday. Thank you, and I look forward to your seeing us in the future.
Aloha and welcome back to ThinkTechHawaii.com. I'm your host, Jeff James, and our show is The Military in Hawaii, Economic Boom or Bust. Our guests today, Cam Napier and Kathleen Galagher with Pacific Business News. So when we took the short break, Cam had asked me a very difficult question. How many people live in housing versus off-base, or how many people
Right.
live off-base and not in housing? And I could say for the Navy component, and you could probably extrapolate this across all the services, I think about half the folks live off-base or not in military housing, and
Right.
half live in housing. So,
Okay.
we're talking about rail, so what's the potential, demographic for ridership? I mean,
Right.
I think we have about 15,000 Navy assigned here, so maybe 8,000 folks. If they lived in an area where rail would make sense. I mean, it wouldn't
Right.
make sense if you live in Kailua or Kaneohe,
Right.
and maybe not even if you lived in like Hawaii Kai or something like
Right.
that, East Oahu. But if you lived in West or maybe even Central Mililani or something like that, it certainly would make sense. So,
Right.
okay, so I think we beat rail into the ground, and I think it would be good to go into something else. Something that we talked about, or that you talked about in your article, but I would like to expound upon, is a little bit about the innovation and technology that the military brings to the table that a lot of folks aren't familiar with. Is there anything you could share in that regard?
Yeah, so I mean, their presence here funds some innovation. So there's companies like Oceanet, which get huge military grants to discover different technologies that can benefit them and that they can then commercialize. So there's companies that are benefiting from those grants. And then the military is also very big in the renewable energy space. So I think HECO is working with
Yeah.
them to create microgrids on some of the bases, and they kind of help fund that. So there's a dynamic working there.
I think I think the Navy funds a portion of the applied research lab at UH, and
Right.
they're doing a lot of work on renewable energy research, and so there's a big tie in there. But there's also, I think, in my experiences in the past, we did a lot with robotics and STEM with youth. So taking, let's talk about a submarine, for example.
Right.
They're very technical and, very difficult and engineering focused. And so the folks that are on the submarines, enjoy that kind of work. And so they're able to translate what they do, and simplify it a little bit and make it to where you can, have the younger generation understand, the importance and value of technology and the science, whatever STEM stands for. They got an A in it now. It's called STEAM because they added the arts back in because that's also important.
Oh,
So
I
think
did
we
not
call
know
it
that.
STEAM.
That's
I didn't know
nice.
it's STEAM now.
Get the arts back. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, nobody wants to sit around with a bunch of engineers. You got to have some art.
Gotta have the crazy kids in
Get
there.
some poets in there.
But yes, there's a lot of effort in that regard, and there's also a lot of effort in innovation. I know the at PAC Fleet, the Pacific Fleet Commander has stood up an innovation cell, trying to, innovation. A lot of people have different interpretations of what that means, but it doesn't mean you're inventing something new. But it's just a different way of looking at even
Right.
some of the same problems that you have, or alternative viewpoints. And so there's a lot of push towards. I think we beat the heck out of the word diversity,
Right.
but diversity doesn't just mean, you look different. It's ways of thinking. And so, I was diverse when I was in the Navy. I mean, I was a surfer my whole life. And so I had a different perspective of somebody that was a Boy Scout. I mean, I wasn't a Boy Scout. But we all come together, and when you put all those different diverse views together, then you can achieve an innovative solution, and something that I don't think a lot of people, I think a lot of folks generally consider the military are all kind of the same, and that's
Right.
it's anything but
Oh,
very far from the
yeah,
truth.
absolutely.
I think there is some concern among kind of startup paradise, which is what they call all this innovation within Hawaii, that some of the funding from the Department of Defense is actually going more into Silicon Valley than it is into Hawaii as it has in the past, which they kind of say is almost on them to be more PR heavy to make their presence known so that the military kind of looks to them. But there has been some concern around that as well.
Yeah. So this is an even-numbered summer. And you being relatively new to Hawaii, you probably aren't familiar with this, but there's this big exercise here called RIMPAC, Rim of the Pacific, which I think
It's coming.
It's going to be here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Like in a number of days. But RIMPAC, started out 40 years ago as just a couple of nations that would get together to exercise and do joint exercises, and now it's grown to, I think there's over 40 nations. There's
Yeah.
going to be 50 some ships that'll be here and a bunch of aircraft and stuff. But this is another reason that I think the impact on Hawaii, the military's impact here on Hawaii, aside from the economic piece of RIMPAC, because it brings a lot of money.
Right.
fills a lot of hotel rooms.
Right.
There's a lot of business out in town. But it also showcases Hawaii as, when the folks come out here from these different nations, I mean, it becomes a vacation destination for their families. A lot
Right.
of them bring their families out here. And so it kind of drives the number one industry, which is tourism.
Right.
But it also provides an opportunity. The military has jumped on board this vehicle and is using it to demonstrate new technologies and in particular energy, renewable energy. They have a task force, energy, that's demonstrating all this stuff. And I know 2 years ago they had a big push for biodiesel, and they operated the Great Green Fleet during RIMPAC. And this year, the Navy sailed a battle group called the Great Green Fleet, which is kind of a play on words for the Great White Fleet, which was back when Theodore Roosevelt did the painted all the ships white and they sailed around the world.
Right.
Well, the Great Green Fleet was all biodiesel
Wow.
fueled vessels, and they're going to be here for RIMPAC again this summer. So Cam, you've been around for RIMPAC. I mean, what's your impression of the impact that RIMPAC brings?
Oh, certainly there is that spending that goes on. People get some shore leave and they go into Waikiki and they dine out and they go to activities, they go to the museums, and I think that's for folks in the civilian world, that's the most obvious presence, is the mix of uniforms you'll see on the streets, and it's great to think of it as this, how much it's grown, and that people are seeing Hawaii as a place where nations are working together instead of being at odds with each other. They're collaborating on this effort. And the Green Fleet, it's interesting that you mentioned that. We had a cover story recently. I think everyone knows Hawaii has an ambitious goal of being on 100% renewable energy by 2045.
Yep.
But we forget often that is specifically about the power grid, the electricity to our homes and offices, which is only 40% of all the energy usage in the state. 60% is for transportation. And it's very difficult to replace fossil fuels when you're talking about buses and trucks and cars, and especially airplanes.
Yep.
8 million people a year fly in and out of Hawaii, and their planes fuel up here. So refineries on the island are producing jet fuel. You've got all the shipping that goes back and forth, keeps everything coming in and our exports going out. So experience like that with the Great Green Fleet, I'm sure that's got to trickle down and provide some solutions on the transportation fuel side.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I would offer to the viewership to watch the show after this one, which is Stan the Energy Man, and he talks
right.
about renewable energy. And one of the opportunities that we have here in Hawaii specifically is hydrogen fuel. And the military did about a 4 or 5 year pilot program using hydrogen fueled vehicles. We built a couple of hydrogen fueling plants. So Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickham's got one on the airfield side that's still producing hydrogen. Hardly anybody's using it, but it's producing hydrogen. I think they have one on the Marine Base and on Schofield. But hydrogen is a very viable transportation fuel. The challenge with hydrogen is it's not a safety issue, but it takes a lot of power to create hydrogen. Pluck apart a water molecule is not as easy as it sounds, and so being able to generate the power in an environmentally green manner, so use the sun more than likely, and create a PV farm that can create the hydrogen. And I know I think Toyota's got hydrogen fueled vehicles here now, commercial or private cars that you can drive on the highway, and then they've got a fueling station at the Toyota dealership here. So there is a move in that direction, and you're right about the goals are just for the grid, not vehicles. And the vehicles is another piece that the greenhouse gas impact and how that affects climate change here, and the rising sea levels. And that's not this is not Al Gore talking. This is actual science now. That was I call it pseudoscience way back then, but there's validity and truth to the issue of climate change. And being an island, we're very susceptible here, and so the military is trying to lead the way in that regard to address those challenges. Rail could be a component of helping solve greenhouse gas, because when you don't drive a private vehicle and you ride electric, assuming of course the electricity is created from a renewable source. Right.
That's the key. If you have an electric car, but coal or oil produce the electricity in the first place, you're just kind of passing the buck a little bit.
So we talked about the Pacific rebalance earlier, and I know you did an article, and you had, I think, interviewed or had some discussions with Senator Hirono or her staff about the rebalance. And I think in that article, it talked about another aircraft carrier being stationed in the Pacific. So
Right. Now that, as I recall, that was being posed as a hypothetical. Maybe you've heard more since.
I just read your articles.
There was, Senator Hirono was sharing with us a new and higher level of intensity of interest on the part of Japan for the U.S. to have another carrier operating in the area. There's some increase in tensions. China's been a little more ambitious on some things, some
Yes.
island construction, and so some rivalries are heating up a little bit, and I think it has some folks in the region feeling a little anxious, and when they feel anxious, they turn to the United States to say, can you help?
Yeah.
And there's nothing like a carrier group, to
Yeah.
make people feel secure, so.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants one of those things parked off your coast.
Right.
I mean, unless it's an exercise and, you're part of the exercise. They
Right.
generally don't deliver good news via
Right.
the aircraft.
I had heard some criticism though with that it's not feasible for Hawaii to have that was pitched, but then kind of people looked a little bit closer and it was probably unlikely.
I would say it's probably unlikely. I wouldn't say it's not feasible.
Okay.
I mean, it's feasible. Anything can be done. If there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
It's just whether there's a political appetite and the impacts, because there's significant impacts, not just, I mean, it's beyond just the military. You've got the economic impact piece of it, because when you bring a carrier, you're going to bring, 100 airplanes.
Right.
You got to base them, you got to fuel them, you got to
Right.
fly them.
And it's an entire battle group, so it's
Yeah.
half a dozen ships or more.
Yeah, they could probably use the ships that are here, because we've got the right mix of ships already here. But
Right.
the carrier's a big. It's a.
So there
big
would
ship.
be space for it, you think?
Well, you'd have to do some. You'd have to undo some things you did in the past, and we talked about Barber's Point. But
Right.
you might have to kind of undo that brack. I don't know.
For the carriers.
Well, where the airplane's going to
wing.
go?
Right.
They're not going to fit on
Okay.
Kaneohe, that's for sure.
Right. Right.
So, anyways, a lot of opportunity, but I think we did a pretty good job addressing the impacts the military has. It's not just the people, it's not just the money, it's the environment, it's the trade,
Right.
it's helping to drive the tourism, which is the
Right.
number one industry, because more exposure is better.
Right.
And I think the people of Hawaii actually, are doing kind of their civic duty when we have RIMPAC here, and sailors from other nations see how we live, and it kind of tells them, hey, we like to live that way too. We don't want to live this other way.
Right.
Or if we have a choice between this other way and this democratic way, maybe the democratic way is not so bad after all. Maybe
Right.
America is a pretty good place, and we'd like to
Right.
kind of emulate and follow in their footsteps. So,
Yeah. You were talking earlier about first order, second order, third order impacts. I think to a large extent, the tourism industry it certainly got off to a strong start in the jet age, because so many military folks came through Hawaii during World War II. And then in the 50s, they have their newfound prosperity, and now you have jet planes. And so suddenly there's thousands and thousands of people who thought, I'd like to go back to Hawaii on vacation this time.
Yep.
Bring the wife, bring the kids. And so, Hawaii just had an immediate post-war jet age tourism industry overnight.
and we still do. And
Yeah.
on that note, Cam, thank you very much. Kathleen, Cam, I want to thank you guys both for being here. I'd like to ask the viewership, thank you for being here as well. This is ThinkTechHawaii.com, and the Military in Hawaii airs every other Friday from 11 to 11:30. So until next time, aloha.